you know, you can you can see a page if it's a splash page, no matter how cool the splash page is. If you look at it and you're reading the book, you're only going to spend so much time on it before you switch to the next page. If it's several different panels, you have to spend time looking at each one of those. So it physically slows the reader down.
Welcome back to Inspired Inc., the CWS podcast, a show where we promote indie comic creators and become inspired by what they create and their journey of creating it. I'm your host, Brandon Bloxdorf, and today on the show, we have creator David Lujan joining us, and we talk about developing a style and utilizing your tools as a digital creator, how you should approach comics like you would building a house, and why you should worry about your next book and not obsess over crowdfunding performance. All of this and so much more on today's Inspired Inc. How does that like help you, after doing a tour and, having some vacation and downtime, how does that like help you like coming back to your comics and art? Do you feel like more inspired? Do you feel like it gave you a lot? Or is it just like a different mindset when you're doing these other activities?
Well, I mean, honestly, like I was working on comics the whole time we were traveling. So
Nice.
when we were on tour, I remember we were somewhere between Phoenix and Flagstaff when I drew the cover for Dusk Witch. I was like,
Oh,
we don't have a cover yet. Do you guys want me to draw one? And I had like spotty internet, and Morgan Quaid was like, yeah, mate, let's do it. And I was like, all right. So you know, I was like, I'll upload this when we get to another city so you can, approve or deny the design. And he loved it. So whatever. But same thing down in Guatemala. I finished the majority of that Big Game Saga comic book
mm,
while I was down there because it was like I've got no like distractions because when I'm home, man, everybody wants me. I got to go work and stuff like that at the club.
yeah.
But down there, it's like I'm not doing anything. I'm just eating and doing yoga and whatever. So I'm gonna draw as much as possible. Yeah,
Oh, nice. That's such like a good clarity moment too, because even like me trying to draw and find that downtime, like almost anything can pull you away from that drawing
yeah,
board. And
yeah,
sometimes it takes so long for you to sit down and get into the zone. And once you're in the zone, like you're just like on fire. But like breaking that and then going back into it can be real like your hand just feels shaky again and you're trying to like realign stuff.
yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, like I found that interpreting scripts that writers send me to turn them into pages, like right off the bat, like figuring out, okay, I got to make these words turn into a thing that's on paper, and how to set it up and all that stuff can be a little bit daunting and weird. But if I'm once I focus and I figure it out, I'm like, okay, so now this is going to be like a close-up shot of this hand lighting a candle, and then I'll do a mini shot of this like stuffed turtle, and then I'll do another mini shot of this one, and that dialogue will go here, and I can like figure it out. But if I only had so some things like require my brain like a lot of focus, like what you're talking about, and then some things I can be anywhere in the back seat of a car getting thrown around with band gear and stuff because I'm just inking. I'm like, it's black, all white. That's tight. You don't really have
Yeah.
to. No offense to inkers, all the inkers out there, but y'all are just dumb. You know.
Well, dude, I always think about that because I would see like images of like Todd McFarlane, like just like, oh, I'm making a page and I'm on a flight, and then like, oh, I'm making a page, I'm in the back of a car right now, and like, oh, I'm making a page, I'm like walking around a convention. You know what I mean?
Yep. Yep.
Especially with digital inks, do you feel like it's a lot easier in that
God.
sense?
Oh yeah, dude. I mean, I ink a lot on airplane flights in the back seats of cars, like to the point where I'm almost kind of barfish. I don't really get car sick, but sometimes, man, if I'm working on some imagery in the back of a car and it's real windy, I'm going to some mountains or something, it's like, oh man, dude, I gotta put this down. I'm gonna puke all over the place. But yeah,
Oh, since I've gotten a lot into inking and like brushes, and I've talked a lot about it with like Doug Knight and Brandon DePillis. We were talking a lot about like what brushes we use and everything. And I do a lot of like traditional stuff, but I'm
hmm
leaning a lot into digital work now because of
hmm
like the speed of it and what you can do, especially coloring wise and everything. When you're doing your digital work, do you feel like you're just, I mean, not only faster, but like do you think that it's just a lot easier for you to like just clean up and spit out work and make mistakes and experiment and just go through the process a bit easier than it is traditionally?
Oh man, yeah, absolutely. I get so worried like when I'm supposed to draw something to fulfill a campaign. Like, oh hey, if you want to, you can add on like a one-off pinup of a character, and I'll draw it for you, whatever. So I'll offer that in like a Kickstarter sometimes. And when I'm doing it, I'll do all the pencils in the iPad, and then
Mhm.
I'll print them off on some thick stock paper, and then I'll go and ink it. But I'll print off like three or four of them, knowing that I'm gonna fuck it up. Like I'm gonna try and ink it, and it's gonna look terrible, and I'm like, no, this is horrible. Let's tear it up, you know. But with digital, you can just hit the back button. You know what I mean? Like, oh, I didn't like that line, you know. So, and it loosens me up. It makes me ink faster because I'm not afraid of making mistakes. You know what I mean? So.
Okay, yeah. And then I know, like, we've talked about it previously on like Apollo when we first like started doing conversations, but especially with Yuriko, you were doing this like thumbprint
Mhm.
background thing. How do you do that on digital, like on a
Uh,
tablet?
I use Clip Studio, and you can make your own brushes pretty easily. I found a couple of tutorials on their website, and like how to make a, you know, you can import any, because every brush is basically like a blob thing that
Hmm.
is then smushed around the page. Sometimes it'll rotate, sometimes it's several blobs that alternate randomly between them to give it texture and to make it look real. And if you blow it up super huge and you just press real quick with the pen, you'll usually see like, oh, it looks like, you know, like a stamp from a sponge or something like that.
Hmm.
And that's what's creating that pen nib to look kind of rough or crazy edges or something like that. So I figured out how to do it, and I just took my thumb and pressed it in ink, smushed it on some paper, and took a picture, and then imported those and made my own brush to do that. I made several brushes to do it. So
Oh, that's so cool. I think that's like one of the coolest things when I opened that book is just like when you told me that and I went through it and was like examining the backgrounds, and it's one of those cool things about comics, like there's so much little details in some work. Some people put like, they draw in like little things and stuff like that, but like
mhm.
what you're doing stylistically within your pieces, I always found very admirable because it's so creative. And to do a background with a fingerprint, dude, it's gorgeous. Like if I wasn't hanging up right here, I'd show everyone on screen. Maybe I'll have Alex splap up a page. But dude, it's one of the coolest things I've ever seen. And when you're looking at inking and when you're developing your inking style, especially digitally, what what practices did you have? Like, who did you look towards and study to really get your style and technique going with that?
um, well, I really wanted the digital stuff to not look digital. I wanted it to look organic as though it was done on paper. So I searched around a lot for like different pens and brushes and things that look kind of grainy, or they have a rough edge to them, stuff like that. First of all, so it's using certain tools, because you know I could use a really smooth like airbrushing tool all the time, and everything would have like a soft fade to it. But I feel like that kind of detracts from it. It's like distracting for me when I read a book and it's just too clean, like it was definitely done in a computer. That
Hmm.
distracts me. I want to see the visceral texture. And I'm not saying everything has to look like a 1930s cartoon, but
Hmm.
um, I really like that textural element. So David Mazzucchelli is one that comes up, you know, Sean Phillips, who worked
Oh
a lot with
yeah,
Dave Brubaker on like Fatale and all that kind of stuff.
yeah.
He inks traditionally. So, but I was, and so did David Mazzucchelli, like Batman
Hmm.
Year One. That's all done on paper. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
So I'm looking at these artists who work on paper and trying my best to emulate that on a digital screen to get it to come across in kind of the same way. But I'm armed with all these like badass tools in Clip Studio. You know, erasing your lines, drawing backwards, drawing transparent on top of other things, like all of that stuff that you can't really do traditionally very easily. You know what I mean?
Hmm. Yeah, no, exactly. And do you practice traditionally still, or are you pretty much primarily a digital artist at this point?
I'm primarily digital at this point, just because I've got like a list of stuff I got to get through. You know what I mean? I
Hmm.
don't have a whole lot of time to just dabble around and mess around and draw for fun. I mean, drawing comics is fun. Don't get me
Yeah.
wrong, but I'm like, I got deadlines. I got this pages got to turn in. I'm like behind on this one, and I got to start that one. And when is this one going to be done, and all that kind of stuff. So I'm I'm glad it's a good place to be. I'm stoked about it. Uh, but yeah, I don't have a whole lot of time to just doodle in a sketchbook.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Especially with everything you do, you have your own creator-owned projects. You're doing projects with other creators at the same time. You're submitting to anthologies all the time as well. What when you're drawing and pulling from your own stories, what's the difference between the layouts and how you format your stories versus when somebody hands you a script? Like, do you pull from that aspect still and go from script style? And how do you balance that out between your own work and making that work to a script handed to you, basically?
I feel like I've been learning a lot, basically, kind of out of frustration sometimes. So
Mm,
like, I'll get a script that I didn't write, and I need to translate it onto a page and somehow figure out how it's going to all fit. And somebody will hand you a, I call it a black page. Essentially, it's just so much text. It's just so many words. It's just so much talking, and you're like, how am I going to keep the reader interested? How am I going to make this so that it's not just big blocks of text? Because while
mhm.
I love reading books, I know a lot of comic book readers, when they see a whole lot of words all grouped together, they're like, I don't want to read that.
Yeah.
We'll skip that page. When do they start fighting? When do they start having sex? So uh, I've learned how to, by actually studying a lot. Katsuhiro Otomo from Kira and Mike Mignola, the way he lays out Hellboy, it's about the tiny, tiny little panel. It's like
Mm,
you can take a thing and it's like, okay, you got dialogue from three different people, and you could have dialogue, dialogue, dialogue all in the same panel, but instead you can make three panels and you break up the dialogue, and those panels are, some of them are super tiny, and it's like a close-up shot of a drill sitting on a counter, because that has to do with something with the story. You know what I mean? Or you're just
mhm.
trying to set the surroundings and give people an idea of where they are and a sense of the room or whatever the space is. And so I've started to kind of try and use that more and more in my own work. So the stuff that I'm writing for my own projects, um, and not like shying away from having a lot of information on one page, because you can do it. You just have to do it right. You know what I mean? So
Yeah. And I mean, with that too, like, a lot of indie creators, when they're starting off and they're trying to figure out how to format a page, paneling is very important. How do you go on your approach of paneling your stuff? I know you're talking about the three, but if you want to break that down a bit more, like constructing your panels and knowing how to space that out and knowing how to break it into three panels and when to break away from the laid out script somebody may have given you with maybe six panels, and you break it into two pages instead of one page. What's your
yeah.
thought process when you're putting that stuff into play?
Uh, you previously, I would get, if I got a script that had like what I thought was too much information for one page, I would break it into two pages.
Mhm.
But now I've learned to figure out ways to kind of cram in a lot of information in one page. Don't be afraid to add panels, like extra panels within the page. You can have a
Mhm.
ton of panels in there. Like Mike Minola sometimes has like 12, 13
Yeah.
panels, and it does not look weird. You look at his pages and like, look at the ones that are super crowded, technically super crowded, and count them. And you're like, one, two, three, four, five. This fool's got 12 panels. Like, what's going on? It's crazy. You know what I mean? But he's doing it in order to uh, create, I guess, create like the tempo of
Mhm.
for the reader to read. Like if you know, you can you can see a page if it's a splash page, no matter how cool the splash page is. If you look at it and you're reading the book, you're only going to spend so much time on it before you switch to the next page. If it's several different panels, you have to spend time looking at each one of those, so it physically slows the reader down. Just thinking about pacing and all that kind of stuff. I don't
Oh,
know.
cool. No, that's a
Paneling
great
too.
summary. Like
Yeah,
tempo is like I feel like is the best word to describe it. Like
yeah,
just choosing that pace for someone to go one, two, very much as when you're counting in music, one,
yeah.
two, three, four. or 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. You know what I mean? Real fast, and
Mhm.
depending on like the words and what information is presented on there, definitely is going to speed or slow down somebody. But I love that. And when do you like developing the mood and developing the tone for that sort of storytelling, do you have to be in a mindset, or do you think it's just come very natural to you, or do you like listen to music to help kind of set yourself up and kind of feel that story or that piece that you're working on?
I have found that I can only listen to music that either has no words or it's in a language that I don't know while I'm
Oh,
working, when I'm paneling, because otherwise it gets distracting.
mm-hmm.
And it's hard for me to kind of focus on the thing that I'm reading, because you think about it, like you're reading a script. When I'm reading, I don't really listen to music unless it doesn't have any words or it's
Yeah.
like something else in the back. You know what I'm saying? So trying to, I don't know. But for inking again, when it gets to the knucklehead part of it, where I'm just like splattering ink on the page and coloring all that kind of stuff, yeah, I totally put on a playlist that's specific for whatever that comic book is. Whether it's time traveling ninjas or it's voodoo witches in New Orleans or whatever it is. I try and like make a cool playlist that I think goes along with the vibe of the story, because then once you start inking, you start coloring, that's when you're like vibing it out. That's when you're like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, I got the parameters, I got the framework. Now let's build the house. What color is the house? What is the trim going to look like? You know, what kind of busted cars are parked outside? That kind of thing. So,
Yeah, no, exactly. I was just talking about this with the creator too, is that like when you're working on comics, a lot of people don't take consideration the outline process of it all. Just straight up either written outline or, paneling out your pages
mhm.
beforehand so that you have a very thorough blueprint. And a lot of creators skip that step, but this is the only like type of world where people feel like they could skip that step, because when you build a house, you're not going to build a house out of nothing. You're going to have that blueprint pretty laid out and mapped out. And
Yeah,
as someone who does that and literally builds houses on his downtime and does construction work, like the importance of like I need a strong base before I build and start elaborating upon it as well.
absolutely, absolutely. It's kind of interesting when you think about it, because like a structure, like a house or a apartment or little studio or whatever it is you're building, the base, like the floor foundation and the roof, are the most important things, because you got to keep the water out and you got to make sure it doesn't fall down. Like you got to make sure it's structurally sound. So those two things are like it, right? And then all the stuff in between, that's just fancy shit for whoever's going to be in the house. Like,
Yeah.
oh, you want walls? Okay, sure, whatever. You know what I mean? Like, you want water, running water? Lame, But so it's the same thing when you're building a comic book. You got to have that. You got to have that strong foundation first, and then the cherry on top, like the color or however you finish out the comic book, like the outside cover, how it's formatted, the design, all that stuff. That's your roof. That's the thing. Like if the cover doesn't look awesome, how are you going to catch the eye of someone just walking by your table at a comic convention? So the
Hmm.
interior could be badass. The story could be the best story that's ever written ever in a comic book. But if the cover is kind of lame or it doesn't catch people's eye,
Yep.
then you're foobarred. They're never gonna pick it up. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. No, it's a great explanation behind that. And I mean, I feel like, again, your covers over here that we have displayed all around me, those are very eye catching. And you chose a different format for your book, especially for Uriko. What was your decision behind going with like a square format versus this typical comic book size?
So I did it mainly just to make Mark mad. Um,
Love it.
Anything I can do to piss that guy off. No, I'm just joking. It does make him upset though. Every time I turn into comic, he's like, "Is this gonna be a normal comic book, or are you sticking to your?" And I'm like, "Nah, dude, it's normal. Don't worry about it." That format was actually because those comic books were initially just going to be zines. I was just going to go to the Kinkos and Xerox copy them on some legal size paper. So
Nice.
14 by 8.5 by 14 or whatever it is, and then you fold that in half, and it's 8.5 by 7,
Hmm.
which is the size that those comics are. So I also think
Oh,
they're going to look
nice.
cool when you do like a collected edition or a perfect bound um, thing. It'll be kind of like a square little box book. So
And it reminds me of like a children's book. You know what I mean?
yeah.
Like that classic children's book size, but very adult, like in the other
Yeah,
spectrum.
I know. It's misleading. Sometimes at cons and stuff, kids are like, "Oh, this one's square. I like it." And I'm like, "Don't touch it. Not for
No,
you,
it gets
Dad. You can
very
touch it."
graphic. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, speaking of which, too, like you are very good at not only writing female characters, but like drawing female characters. Since in both Nerida and Yuriko, those are your leads. Where did your style and understanding of like anatomy come from to like create these beautiful, just honestly, I love your work so much, and I hate to like always just like when I have a creator on just admire them and like praise them so much, sometimes, but like I genuinely love how you draw your characters. Like where do you pull from to have such great facial expressions, great body types? Like what are you practicing to get that down so well?
Well, when I was younger, I used to, basically emulate Travis Charest, and Mark Silvestri and Jim Lee and all those guys. And, I loved 90s comics when I was a kid. Uh, so I would just draw those characters over and over again. And then there was like Brutes and Babes was Bart Sears. He did a
Hmm.
tutorial in Wizard magazine when I was a kid in the 90s. And then
Yeah.
after him, it was Crash Course with Greg Capullo. So I
Oh,
was
cool.
learning from that stuff to start with, and then my dad was a paramedic, and he was then an RN at the ER, and so he had a lot of anatomy books, and he was like, "Hey, you want these anatomy books to, like, I don't know, draw on or whatever." They
Hmm.
were coloring books that nurses were supposed to use to literally color them with markers or whatever to like remember the different parts of the body that the anatomy. So I studied those like crazy. And then when I was in art school, I did a ton of life drawing. Um,
Oh, cool.
yeah, which is any, I'm telling you, any comic book artist who's out there who's just getting started, you can find a life drawing class somewhere in your town. Like, you don't have to be an art student, you don't have to be enrolled in a university or anything. Like, you can find some human person that will let you draw them, and you just give them a couple bucks. And usually it's like a group of people will get together and like, hey, we're going to hire a model. The more of us who sign up for this thing or want to come to it, the cheaper it's going to be for all of us, because the model wants $100 and there's 10 of us, so that's $10 a person. It's
Hmm.
cheap. Then
Yeah.
you get to sit there and you actually get to draw a human without feeling uncomfortable about looking at a human, because that's what they're there for. So that's kind of where how I started drawing the comic book babes, and then when I got to college, I started drawing actual babes slash also like really frumpy, weird looking people they're way more fun to draw. They
I was
really
about to
are.
say, like, that does that add more excitement because it adds like more like depth and texture and things you're not used to, and it's kind of more like you're adding more folds and like sides and wrinkles, type of thing, like
Yeah,
detail, I guess.
yeah. The idealized human form is has been done to death, right? You
Yeah.
know what I mean? So it's good to be able to do that, but then it's way more fun to break the rules and draw somebody who doesn't look like that. Or,
Hmm.
I mean, people come in all different shapes and forms. Yuriko has big boobs, but Dusk Witch has no boobs at all, but she's got a big butt and big lips and big hair. You know what I mean? So it's like
Yeah.
finding these different characters and people, and trying to put them in their scenario, and manipulate them like they're kind of like it's a puppet show kind of, is really really fun for me. So
That's cool. Yeah, and honestly, I could see that like the variety within your characters and within your work. And I was reading something about who wrote Strangers in Paradise. Terry Moore, I think his name is. But he has like a book on drawing. And I was looking at Strangers in Paradise, and the female characters they have in there they're not like what you would see in any modern comic. They do have imperfections, which is not imperfections, it's what real people look like. And it's
yeah,
not so animated and cartoony, even though it does have a cartoony feel. It just has more real life proportions, I guess is what I'm trying to say, within
yeah,
the comic, and that gives a comic more flavor, I feel. And I think it attracts a different type of audience who is like, oh, like this seems like something like not only relatable but just like cartoony but real. It's hard to really put I guess a word towards that. But I think it's a great way to look at art, and it's a different way to look at comics because we are very used to that house style that we see all across mainstream comics mostly, you know?
Hmm. Yeah, the idealized female form too. Sometimes I see people drawing stuff on Twitter or whatever. So they're like, my Kickstarter's coming up, and this blah blah blah, and I'll look at it and I'll go and check out their page, and I'm like, man, like I don't really, I'm not 12. I don't really want to see like fake boobs that are just kind of stuck on Michelangelo's. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
Like it
yeah,
doesn't,
exactly.
it doesn't do anything for me anymore because I'm not 12. So
Every
I,
character looking like Power Girl, you know what I mean? That
exactly, exactly. Yeah, it's pretty outlandish. It's pretty crazy, and that's not to say that there aren't women in the real world who are voluptuous and have curves and all
Mhm.
that kind of stuff. There are, but also there are there's just so many different body types that it's much more relatable, like you said, to be able
It's
to take those and put them in context in a comic book.
in a very like, parental advisory aspect. It's kind of just like you don't go into the world to look for like, a girlfriend or a soulmate and expect to find like a porn star looking girl and, go with that. That's kind of the equivalent to like the house style that we always see versus like,
Yeah,
oh, a real person and a real body is like what you're attempting and you're drawing and you're mimicking more of than like that, idealized aspect, that
yeah.
dreamland fantasy that doesn't really exist in reality, to be honest.
But I mean, I was talking to another creator, and he was like, "Well, that's why our books don't, fund for $20,000 on Kickstarters because we don't fill our books with like boobs and the idealized female form that doesn't exist in reality. Because all the people who back those things, they just would really really like to have that and fantasize about having it,
Mhm.
and so that's kind of what gets them. But for me, for comic books, like I'm totally selfish. Like Yuriko and Narita, I'm just making those because I want to, because
Yeah,
it's something that I want to write about and I want to draw. So if you like it, cool. If you don't like it, cool.
yeah.
Like that's how
That's
I
what's
feel
cool
about it.
about indie comics too. It's like you're making the books you want to read and see on the shelves, and you're creating the art that like, oh, this is missing, and I would love to have something like this. So here you are making it, and having that be so diverse and different is what makes indie comics important because it's not all the same thing, copy cutter and cookie cutter pasted just over and over like we see with many bigger publishers and bigger companies. So having that flavor and having that variety, although we're not making $20,000 off of our Kickstarters, we're still
Yeah,
like appealing to like a very, niche group of people that are heavily supporting our work no matter what, because they see what we're pouring into it.
yeah.
And you had some great success with your Kickstarters and with your campaigns. What do you think has been like some of your favorite, positive wins from that and that you've learned and that you could share? And maybe some things like maybe a failure or two that you could kind of like had to learn a lesson from, maybe in a hard way.
Cool. If you're mailing something to Canada, make sure you put all the comics in that you're supposed to mail to that person. Because if not, then you have to mail it again to Canada, and that is expensive. And you will end up eating the cost, and you will basically just be giving away comics for free to whoever backed that campaign. That's lesson number one. uh, I think that a lot of the takeaways from all of the Kickstarter stuff is that if you if you kind of streamline it for yourself and figure out what your comfort level is in terms of how much you want to put into promotion and how much you want to put in uh, to like shouting about it, then you're going to be okay. Some people I've seen, they just, man, they stress about it so hard.
Mhm.
They're thinking about it constantly. They're hitting that refresh button every few minutes, and I'm not sure that that's helpful with the funding of their campaign. Like you might eke out a few more dollars out of the thing, but it's almost like that initial burst of energy and then the closing burst of energy that typically happens within a Kickstarter campaign. Those are the things that you can kind of count on, and that you can say, okay, well, that's what it is, and hopefully it'll grow next time. But let me just make another comic book instead of spending time. I found that spending time stressing about whether or not this comic book could make a little bit more money on Kickstarter, spend that time working on the next book and getting it ready to go to put on Kickstarter, because
Nice.
I feel like that's much more productive for me anyway, than trying to run a protracted, like crazy campaign with tons of headache involved in it and all that kind of stuff. Also, on the backside of it, if you can figure out how to organize your fulfillment stuff afterwards, man, that's like, get yourself some highlighters,
Yes.
print out the list, the CSV or whatever that comes on Kickstarter, and just be like, this guy, and this guy all ordered extra things. What were those extra things? Type it in, be like, okay, they wanted a T-shirt, that dude wanted a sticker, that kind of stuff, and just do all that and get it down so it's streamlined, and that will save you a lot of headache when shipping things to Canada.
Straight up, dude, that fulfillment process is just like an extra week of work that like when you're first time doing it, like you're not really realizing how much goes into it. And we've discussed a lot. You've actually helped us with our campaigns because you helped us realize that like 11 by whatever 14 poster, the punk posters fit very well within a comic book sized board. And just the initial like figuring out how are we going to package this, what's the best way to stack them right so the books are secure, and like how do you add things without adding too much weight to change the what we're charging for shipping. All that stuff is heavily important. And we even do like handwritten notes and everything for every backer and whatnot, and that stuff like that makes a difference. But just like how you organize yourself to get that done and stay organized, vital, because you can have a mess in a second, especially if you have cats. Dude, my cat goes crazy with all that stuff. Like
cats or kids.
There you go. Yeah,
they'll just destroy everything. Yeah.
And do you have so much going on? You have music going on, you have your family, you have comics. How do you go about balancing and having the appropriate amount of time to devote to your crafts, but like your family and rest and downtime and day job?
Well, as it stands right now, my day job is theoretically comic books.
Cool.
So I've been able to I just kind of set up a series of goals for myself. I was like, okay, by the time I'm, this old, I need to not be working construction anymore. By the time I'm this old, I need to have this project done, that project done, blah, 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 blah. So I set like mini goals that are time-based so that I can finish projects and get them off the desk and then move on to the next project. That's really the best way for me to organize myself, because I do have a lot of stuff going on. I've also got like a small screen printing shop that I opened with a friend last year.
Mm-hmm.
And that thing, that's like intermittent. I haven't poured a whole bunch of time and energy into like promoting it or anything like that. But I don't know. I just have like multiple sources of income. So I don't really have like a day job,
Yeah.
Just constantly hustling for whatever pennies I can get. You know what I mean? I also run sound at a small punk club in Austin.
Cool.
Yeah, so that's
what club do you run sound in?
It's this place called The Parlor.
Oh, nice, dude. That's sick.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. I if it's the one I'm thinking of, I have been there before. If it's like the shop I'm thinking of, but dude, I miss Austin a lot. It's such a cool
Austin's
city.
pretty fun, man. You should come down for Staple. I heard Mark got a booth for LKC, so
maybe we'll see what's up. I got some friends out there I could crash with for sure. That would be super fun. And I mean, do you think that Austin community and the city you're in has really helped attribute to that type of creative success where you could kind of live off of your creative endeavors instead of maintaining that like 9-to-5 day job?
No. Austin has not helped at all. Austin has been like the man. It's really, really difficult to succeed in this place. It's super duper expensive. It's more and more becoming not for people like me. All of my creative friends in the music world have moved out of town. They basically all live on the outskirts of town. And my wife and I, we were lucky we bought a house when I was like 24 or something, 26.
Cool. Yeah.
Because we were like, dude, these houses are going to be so expensive in a few years. Like we have to. And at the time I was like bartending. We were both just like working in restaurants and that kind of thing. So we had to just kind of lie, cheat, and steal our way in, which is not cool. And that just, what that tells me is that it's not set up for someone like me to succeed. It's set up for someone like me to fail, basically, because I don't have a ton of money. But
Yeah.
you do what you got to do, and you just keep hustling and trying to make ends meet. You know,
Hmm.
I always prioritize. I just prioritize stuff. I'm like, you know what? I like playing music. I'm not going to stop playing music just because I don't have enough money to play music. Because I don't have enough money technically to play music in this town, and I don't have enough money to be an artist full time in this town. But I'm not going to let it stop me from doing those things because at that point they've won. You know what I'm saying? You can't let them win.
Yeah. Yeah, dude, 100%. And it's wild because, man, like, whatever, I guess it's been like, how old am I now? I guess like 14 years, like 12, 14 years since I've really gotten to tour through Austin and playing a band and stuff like that. And just hearing like that transformation, something like a city like that can have, from it being like keeping it weird and just having so many artistic presences in there and things going on all the time for artists, to like basically kind of becoming the way California became with big tech. It's kind of turned
Yeah,
into that same environment, and with bigger companies like Apple and whatnot taking over in that region, really increasing everything so much that it's insane how these big tech companies that are so driven by like, oh, creativity and this, but then they're actually just sucking that away from us
yeah,
slowly, more
yeah.
and more, and making it impossible to be a creative no matter what.
Yeah, people move to town because of create the creative atmosphere, right? But they're not
Mhm.
creative at all. Like they're just squares, which is fine. You can be a square, that's cool. But they
Yeah,
move here so that they can be near the creative stuff. But in so doing, they displace the creative stuff. And then the creative stuff can no longer exist in the place where they move to in order to be near it.
yeah.
So it's this weird catch 22 thing where it just implodes on itself, and it's very very strange. I have met quite a few people in like the tech industry who are not necessarily like artistically inclined at all, and they're very supportive of
Mhm.
all the stuff that I've got going on. Like some of my friends, they're like, hell yeah, we know that we know that you're not like a licensed contractor, but we want to hire you because you're an artist, and that means something to us, and we want to be able to support you however we can. That kind of
That's
thing.
awesome. Yeah,
You can call it charity if you want, but like I said, man, I'm just hustling so I can keep the dream alive. So I'll take it,
straight up.
whatever. So
Dude, it's true because all these people, the mass majority of people in the world out there, get off of their day job and they pick up a comic and they pick up a movie or put on an album to like escape reality, because that helps them. That helps them get out of this insane world we live in, and it puts them in a different place, and it lets them relax. It puts them in somewhere fun or exciting and whatnot. But like the people like us who are creating this material and content to make those people feel good, we're not
mm,
really getting anything out of it most of the time, except the ability to create that content at
yeah,
most, as we struggle with our day jobs and figuring out life and all that type of stuff. It's a weird imbalance in the world, how like they need everything we make, but they're not giving us the ways to like make them at all. So we all
yeah,
just grind, just grind.
yeah. And the important thing is to not like get taken advantage of to the point where you're just grinding yourself into the ground until you don't want to do it anymore because you've seen zero success.
Hmm.
The important thing is to keep keep enough like self awareness to be able to say, okay, I'm worth this much. Like when I'm doing this thing, I'm not going to undervalue my services. If somebody wants to hire me to do an illustration or print some shirts or run sound at a club or build them a house or whatever, be like, I'm worth this is you need to pay me this much. And 9 times out of 10 people are like, yes, because I can't do that thing that you can do. You know what I mean? So, and
Yep.
it's up to you as an entrepreneur or a comic maker or whatever to place that value on yourself, because otherwise, if you leave it to somebody else to tell you a price and how much you're worth, they're going to be like 675 an hour, homie. That's how much you're worth. You know what I mean? And that's
Yeah.
not okay. You know?
Do you think
So
that's helped like prevent you from burning out in a lot of your creative endeavors?
yeah, I mean, yeah, absolutely. If I do a creative thing and there's no reward at all, like I get nothing out of it at all, it's hard to continue to do it.
Hmm.
And it's not to say that it has to be a financial reward. It could be like, you put out a single, you put out a record, and someone listened to it and said, man, that's awesome, it was really good, I've had it on repeat, I love your record. That means enough to me to say I want to make another record. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's like playing a show and there's only 4 people in the space, but all 4 of them bought a T-shirt, sticker, record, and like a pair of screen printed underwear from you, and you're like, hell yeah! I just the whole crowd bought something. Everybody loved it. There was
Yeah.
only 4 people there, but those 4 people are more important than the 150 people who don't give a damn who were at the last show.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
That's me.
Yeah, because then they're going to come back again and they're going to remember you. They're going to support you and they're going to like
Yeah.
post about it, and that's what's going to bring real true fandom and real true support towards you. Um, do you like, mixing music and comics and, all your other abilities into one has crafted you into this kind of very ultimate creative machine where you're very handy with almost anything that you pick up at this point. What do you think the next challenge is out there for you, or are you looking for another challenge?
Ooh, that's a good question. I have projects that are going to be challenging, but I think the next like existential challenge for me
Mhm.
would be to like broaden the swath of the comic industry that I'm involved in. Like I'm just a tiny, tiny little speck on the cosmos of indie comics, and the indie comics is a tiny, tiny little speck on the cosmos of published comics. So I think the next foray for me is to have enough confidence in my work and in myself to start trying to make forays into other publishing companies and say, hey, what about me? I can draw better than that schmuck you hired. Like, hire me instead. Or I can write better than that asshole. He doesn't know what he's doing. Like, this guy, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But it's hard for me to have that kind of confidence because I'm also totally fine with just sitting at my desk being like, I'm just gonna draw some vampires and I guess people will like it.
Yeah.
So that's the next existential crisis for me, I think, in the coming 2 years. I'm giving myself 2 years to do it.
Oh, that's rad. I love that because I mean, that adds up about right to like where you were with music and how comics have taken off for you the past couple years into, going into the screen printing business and like starting that endeavor. So I would see how that's the next unfolding chapter for you is just to kind of grow now like yourself with what you already have, utilizing it. And I guess in a weird way, I hate using this word, but in a more professional manner in that kind of
Yeah,
essence. Yeah. And I mean,
totally.
you know, all of your books, you're having success, you're having multiple series come out. Do you have anything else lined up story wise that you would like to take on, but you just haven't had the chance to go chase after yet?
You talking about stuff that I've written myself?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, there's two stories. One in particular is called Yuki the Dragon Slayer that I may or may not have talked about before, but my daughter and I wrote it together, and it's just
Oh, cool.
about this interdimensional um, young dragon slayer chick who is chasing the dragon, and they come through a portal and they end up destroying this middle school, and that's issue 1, and we're going from there. But we've got the entire issue scripted. She hates my illustrations. She's like, I don't like the way character looks. I don't like this. I don't like that. Because she draws herself too. And I'm like, well, you draw it. And she's like, no, you're the comic artist. You're better at it than me. It's a lot of work. And so that's something that I want to get off the ground just because, I think it'd be really fun.
Yeah.
But despite all the arguing. But the other thing that I really wanted to do is to publish the actual novel, the Uriko novel, which is
Oh, wow.
like 300 pages of prose with no illustrations at all, because that would be a feather in my hat or whatever, of saying I published a book up here, check it out, it's on Amazon or whatever, like you can go read it, you can laugh about how poorly I write, it'd be great. But yeah, then also I wrote I don't know, like 200-300 pages of short stories too that are all kind of about just all kinds of weird stuff, but it's not comic related. But a lot of them would translate really well into like a collected edition of short story, like kind of graphic novel kind of situation. Be a little bit more slice of life and less monsters and fantasy and guns and action and sci-fi. It would just be about crazy stuff that I've experienced or other people have experienced living in Texas.
Oh, cool.
And that would
That's
be fun
fun.
too.
Dude, I'll jump in on that. That'd be
It's very adult, it's very grown up. it's not like exciting or anything. But you know, I am a grown up, whether I come across that way or not. I actually am pretty much old now, so I like to think I'm not, but you know,
Dude, I feel you. Even at my day job, I'm known as like the younger one, even though I'm like one of the oldest ones there. And everyone's just like, I forget you're like this age because just what you do and how you act and just who you are, like it
yeah,
doesn't add up. And I'm just like, yeah, it's I guess because we make comics, it keeps our youth there. You know what I mean? Like
yeah,
that's
yeah, yeah,
as stressful as they are, keeps us young no matter what.
yeah, absolutely, for
I
sure.
love it. David, this has been awesome and amazing. And I always love talking to you. And I could talk to you forever and just like catch up. And like hopefully soon we can hang out in Austin, have a cup of coffee, and just like talk about everything else besides comics and life and whatnot, you know?
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and it's always a pleasure reading your material. And I can't wait to get Dusk Witch in my hands because I haven't gotten my copy yet, but I'm so hyped for it because it looks beautiful. But why don't you tell us where we could find you and your work and what you're going to be up to in 2024?
Okay. So at Nerida Comic is my kind of Instagram and Twitter and Facebook and all of the social media gobbledygook out there. If you want to follow me and see what I've been drawing or what I'm up to, and let's see. In 2024, I'm hoping to start cracking on Dusk Witch 2, Narita Book 2, Uriko Book 3. I just finished a book called Big Game Saga. It's about a time traveling ninja. That's really fun, and I'm hoping that we can find a publisher for that and get that out the door. And I'm also working on something called Beyond the Petrichor, which is like a post-apocalyptic comic about this young female who is living in a world where there's like these roving acid rains that just melts everything except for plastic. And it's her and her stuffed turtle, which is animate and talks to her. But I don't know, and the viewer doesn't know whether or not she's just losing her mind because she's been alone for a while, and because everybody else is kind of dead or washed away or gone. We don't know yet, right? So I've been working on that, and it's written by Dakota Brown, the writer. Who
Cool.
he's done some stuff with Mad Cave Studios, I think, and Scout Comics and all that. So he's gonna try and make that come to fruition and see if we can get that book off the ground too. It's really fun to draw so far. I love it. So
Yeah, that sounds fun. It sounds very interesting too. I'd be hyped
yeah,
to check that out, dude. That's awesome.
yeah, it's a weird one. Sure.
Too cool. Love hearing about it, man. Love about everything you're doing with the community and your work, and I can't wait to hang with you soon. And for everyone else, go check out the links at the bottom, support his work, and for all of our viewers and listeners, don't forget to subscribe, hit that notification bell. We have a bunch of cool stuff happening. We have a bunch of great announcements and special guests coming. Don't forget to check out like our last special guest, which was Thomas Healy, the editor in chief for Spawn. So many cool things here happening at Inspired Inc. And as always, thanks for hanging, stay creative, and stay inspired. Looking for high quality printing, fast turnaround, and the industry's best customer service? Look no further than Comix Wellspring. Trusted by thousands of indie comic creators, Comix Wellspring is proven to be the go-to comic book printer. So when you're ready to bring your comic books to life, go to comicswellspring.com and be sure to check out one of the best platforms to sell your physical and digital comics online, the CWS Bookstore. Remember to subscribe, hit that notification bell to see our lives come out twice every single week on YouTube and podcast platforms. And also tag us when you share your favorite episodes and moments from the show. And remember, creators, thanks for hanging, keep creating, and stay inspired.